I have a couple of questions that I'd like to pose to the panel, and then have there maybe 1 minute less reaction, and then we have interaction among the panelists, and then we have some questions for you. And I guarantee you'll be finished in an hour. I guarantee it. Now, let me start with Ambassador Hart. I'm going to have to give you an MD. Really, you speak so authoritatively about NCDs. But how are you going to translate your comments? How are you going to translate your comments to getting the heads there? How are you going to say to them in the assembly, look, it is beneficial to you to be there? What would you say to them?
Thank you, Sir George. And I draw so many parallels between this issue and the issue of climate change, which I have a tad bit more experience and expertise in. And as Beatrice said, leaders, they're like winds. If they're coming to a session like the high-level meeting, they want to be part of a winning coalition.
Okay.
Right? They want to be part of a willing coalition. So you need ambitious outcomes in terms of the political declaration, but you also need them to bring something to the table. And Ambassador Rattray, you may recall when I was in a different life at the UN, I went over to your office to encourage you to get your Prime Minister to attend one of the UN Secretary General's summits. And we were very clear. We wanted leaders from small island developing states, from the vulnerable countries, to exercise leadership, bring at that time, a national climate plan, bring something on an initiative on building resilience to climate change. And similarly, that could be the angle that is used. I also, it's very important to build momentum towards this meeting. Momentum, momentum, momentum. So Jamaica is chairing CARICOM. They will be playing an extremely important leadership role. I understand that the Prime Minister of Jamaica will be invited to the G7 meeting in Canada. So we really need to identify leaders within our region to deliver the CARICOM message, to deliver the Caribbean's message on this important issue. But momentum, momentum, momentum.
Momentum. Don't beat them over the heads. They have to come with the wind. They would like to come there and say, we did well. We done good. Okay. Ambassador Rattray mentioned you as representing Jamaica, and Jamaica being head of the G7. This panel was supposed to discuss strategies to encourage the highest level political attendance at the UNHLM. It's not that we are oblivious of the importance of the other issues discussed today, but we're going to focus specifically on how to make this UNHLM a major success and how to have the Caribbean play a major leading role in this. Ambassador Rattray, from your position in New York, there's a group of CARICOM ambassadors. How are you going to get them to have their heads feel that there's a win to be had in New York?
Thanks, Sir George. There are 14 of us, as you know, in New York. So we meet regularly and the chairmanship rotates. So one country has it for 2 months and then it rotates after that. It's not as straightforward as you think, because obviously government officials can't, in the classic sense, lobby their own government. So you really need to think a little bit about how you prevail on your minister or your head of government.
The Chatham House rules here, huh? Nothing is attributed to Ambassador Rattray. Go ahead.
So I don't think the question is, how do you get them to attend the high-level meeting? I think the question is, how do you get them to attend the opening of the United Nations 73rd session? Because this meeting is going to be on the 3rd day of the UN general debate. Mm-hmm. If Caribbean leaders choose to go to the general debate this year, but I think you're going to guarantee that they're going to go to the high-level meeting. You need to make sure that they go to the general debate, because not all the leaders go every single year.
Okay.
So like my prime minister might say, well, you know, I went to the UN in September for the past 2 years. I'm going to give it a break this year. We need to make sure that he actually attends the UN general debate. It could be an incentive for him because of the high-level meeting on tuberculosis and on NCDs. But once they're in New York for the high-level week, I think you're going to know that they're going to attend the NCD. They obviously are going to attend that.
So the message for us all is that we want the ambassadors, the heads, to be there for the UN meeting. And in a sense, the UNHLM on NCDs will be a sweetener, as it were, an additional carrot.
Yeah, my experience is that they just never ever go consistently. They will go 2 or 3 years and say, okay, I'm going to give New York a break this year. Yeah. Foreign minister, you go. That's not what you want. You don't want foreign ministers there. No. You want heads of government and heads of state.
So we want
there.
to make it such a special occasion that every minister would hold his mantle cheap if they did not, oh, no, I shouldn't say that, is just sexist, will be very upset if he or she did not go to the high-level meeting.
Make one more point. The councils of CARICOM, in this case, the Foreign Ministerial Council, COFCOR, and the COSHAD, I think, you know, those meetings are attended by ministers. And better than ambassadors trying to leverage our heads, it's better that we try and leverage our ministers and then get the ministers to prevail on the heads. So like I'm here in Jamaica until Thursday. I just happened to run into my minister, and she's like, I need 10 minutes of your time before you leave. Well, what that says to me is that I have 10 minutes to sell her on NCDs.
Good.
So I need one thing, which is I need to be able to make the case in terms of a ministerial brief where I can just give it to her and say, this is why it's important for us to be there, but more importantly for the Prime Minister to be there, and it will be during the time, as Selwin said, when Jamaica is chairing the CARICOM. So that's another strategy.
No, Rudy is not here. In an ideal world, that is a CARICOM function to prepare and distill the information to go to COFCOR, the meeting of foreign ministers and the meeting of, say, the ministers of health. Ergo, since Rudy is not here, let us assume that we are CARICOM. And let us then say that from this meeting will go forth directives to Rudy and his superiors that they must prepare the necessary material to present to COFCOR and meeting of ministers of health, so that in a very concrete term, so that they feel constrained to go to New York. Fair? Right, fair. Now, Katie, you have a magic wand. Here's your magic wand. And I'm going to say to you, you have a magic wand. How would you wave it to ensure that civil society as a whole, what lessons you can give to civil society in the Caribbean such that they would be more effective in getting the heads to this to New York? What would be your reaction?
I guess just, well, one additional point to I think what's been raised so far. I think absolutely as civil society and as, you know, as the Caribbean community, we need to be focusing on getting our heads of government and heads of state to New York. But I don't think equally we should actually lose sight of actually we want them to be doing there and to be saying there. I think when we're talking to our heads of government and heads of state, we should be thinking about what's in it for them and what are they actually interested in from their own domestic policy perspective and international policy perspective. And using that as a way in to say, hey, if you're interested in economic growth, if you're interested in gender equality, if you're interested in whatever, phrasing the pitch for NCDs within and couch it within the context of their own domestic policy interests, which I think would be important. And the second part of it is also thinking about, yes, we want a load of heads of government, heads of state to turn up in New York, because that's a clear indicator of political leadership of NCDs. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that what comes out of this meeting is an outcome document. And if we end up having a load of heads of government, heads of state purely in New York, making very strong statements, that's great. But if we've got a really, really weak outcome document that doesn't really say anything, that is not necessarily going to result in much. So I think we need to be thinking kind of, you know, two-pronged. Yes, heads of government, heads of state. But secondly, what do we actually want our heads of government and heads of state and our governments to be pushing during the negotiations of the outcome document to make sure that we have a strong statement, that we have strong commitments, and that we see some kind of way forward. And I guess the third part, just as a final quick one, is the other way that I think we can be presenting this to governments is this is a fantastic platform for them. You know, this is a global platform where they can be standing up and saying, hey, you know, government of Chile, I have, you know, fantastic experience in nutritional labeling, as Beatrice was saying. So many other examples of good policies that governments have implemented since 2014. And I think the more that we can encourage governments to be using it as a global platform to be getting recognition for the work that they've done, perhaps the more likelihood that they're actually going to turn up and say, you know, I want to be part of this.
Fantastic. Two, as Shaggy would say, fantastic. What you really want them to hear is their presence and a message. They must have a presence there and a compelling message to the rest of the world, right? So those are two things that are really critical, a presence there and a compelling message to the world. Ambassador Rattray, going to come back to you afterwards because you have more experience than anyone else here in the negotiation outcome document. So I'm going to come back to you and ask you about the question that Katie posed. How do we engineer? I know it is not easy. By definition, it can't be easy. How do we try to ensure that some of the things we care about get into the outcome document? So take a rest. I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. Let me come on to Ms. Longsworth. Civil society is one, the mobilization of civil society and the use of social media is probably one of your fortes. You know a lot about that. How do you think that civil society, that the mobilizations of the media, of the social media in the interim can be important? Petitions, is YouTube or Instagram or what? How do you think those things can be used?
Certainly, civil society can play a major role, especially in the absence of interest in terms of our political leaders in really addressing NCDs in a substantial way. We can certainly use social media as we do at the Belize Cancer Society. We lobby, we advocate, there's a petition, we put it online, and people become very interested and they share it. We have had successes with that. But I think that this issue needs innovation. And I think that we need to tackle it on the ground at all levels, high and low. I think that civil society can certainly lobby as a group for the creation of a technical group to prepare our leaders for such a meeting at the UN. Because it will take some lobbying. It will definitely take some lobbying to get the right people. We have our national health insurance that has an excellent NCD program in the country. Although it has not been rolled out to the entire country, it's a very good program. If we were to showcase our achievements and our advances, and create position papers on these issues, showing our leaders why they really must attend these meetings, because it's an opportunity not only to showcase, but to garner resources for gaps in our care programs. Okay. So yes, we can use it. Civil society can organize. We can use social media. We can certainly lobby, visit our leaders. We can visit leaders right up to the Prime Minister. But most importantly, we also need to work with our partners in health for a technical group to prepare our leaders to attend the meeting in New York.
What I take away from this, and that is really very positive, what I take away from this is that, for example, police can go there and say, our national insurance system did X so that our people NCDs are protected. Also, you point out is a challenge, I think, obliquely to the company here. The use of the social media is not the responsibility only of Ms. Longsworth. It's responsible every every person here assembled. So she's asking you all, including Professor Theodore, including, is he listening? Including Dr. Davidson, to use your contacts to spread the word out there. That is what you're asking, right?
Yes, and I'm also inviting you, Professor, to maybe come in and visit our
if you invite me, I'll come.
You'll come? Okay.
Yeah.
Because maybe some high-level visitors to leaders,
well then,
maybe Dr. Etienne, maybe Dr. Hennis, and his team can come in and meet with some of our leaders.
High-level visitors, you're not talking about me. But Beatrice, now I was so motivated by what the things that you said. Could you expand a bit more for us on how this is what Ms. Long was saying? How are you going to get the people, the people involved in this, so that their leaders can follow them?
Well, this goes to a discussion you and I had at breakfast this
Obviously.
morning. Yes. Well, we talked about the fact that we really needed to reach people in vast numbers, and that actually, when you start thinking about it, practically everyone is touched by NCDs. It's a rare person. It's about 10% of the population that doesn't have at least a risk factor. So that means you have to reach everyone. It seems to me social media is a wonderful way to do that. It has to be a simple message. It has to be very clear. It has to go to lots and lots of people. And so we talked about examples. The Me Too movement, for example, has reached many, many women that one would never have imagined. So we thought about the us too, or we too, as possibilities that everyone that is affected by NCDs, by any of the NCDs, so it has a risk factor, to be able to say so, to be able to say perhaps how it impacted them. I was impressed by being asked to come when I came here. Just what is my motivation? What is my personal motivation? And I started thinking about it, and I was practically in tears because I only knew one of my grandparents. Two of them died of NCDs. My husband, my sons, my father, my mother, everyone around me has an NCD. And it really touched me. And I think if other people could also be given that opportunity, I think in the website, the enough website, there is an opportunity to do some of that. I think it needs to be much, much more greatly expanded. That's what I would do, but I mean, maybe it doesn't sound so innovative.
Of course it's innovative. Of course it's innovative. If you could have, as I tell you, the 4 billion people in the world are interested in articulating a position, of course it'd be innovative. So I've been looking forward to hear much more about that. But Ambassador Hart, you mentioned that there were 3 pillars to the OAS, but you didn't mention security is coming into this. How are you going to bring, because that is something that's going to touch, large numbers of heads of government. That is very high on the agenda now, not only the United States.
Yeah, I think I did mention the 4th pillar, security, but you had the OAS has these 4 pillars. The organization is built around these 4 pillars: democracy, human rights, security, and development. And the reality, as you correctly said, these pillars are interrelated and mutually reinforcing. And there are very few issues that are cross-cutting in nature, like the issue of NCDs. And as you know, given the current environment in the United States, that the issue of security and national security is paramount. And quite frankly, this is one of the entry points for incorporating or for bringing some of these development challenges like NCDs and climate change into a discussion. Because the reality is, as we look at the outcome document, not everyone will agree, or there might not be consensus on the level of ambition of the outcome document. And very difficult compromises will have to be made during the process of a negotiation. So we really will need to find ways of we need as a region clarity on what we must absolutely have. What are some of the key coalition partners that we have to engage with? For example, I know within the Latin American region, countries like Chile, Uruguay, Mexico are important players in the United Nations and will play important roles in the negotiation. So we need to build coalitions with some of those countries, because there will be some, or one in particular, that will remain nameless, that might have some objections as it relates to the level of ambition for the outcome document. But I also think that we need to look at the road towards New York, because there will be a negotiation taking place at the level of ambassadors and diplomats and delegates in New York. And of course, we want our heads to attend. And we, those delegates and ambassadors will need your inputs as they negotiate that document. But as we try to get heads there will be a series of events and activities occurring at the political level within our region. There's a CARICOM heads of government meeting that will take place here. I see that as an opportunity to engage foreign ministers and heads of state on participation and on identifying key regional priorities. And again, I see the OAS General Assembly, and we will be using that forum really to advance and some of the elements that I mentioned earlier. It will have participation at the level of foreign ministers from around the hemisphere, because Ambassador Rattray is right. It will be the foreign minister who will have to go into that room with the prime minister or president and convince him or her not only to attend the New York session, the UN session, but also to participate in the high-level meeting.
Okay, we are going a bit beyond getting them there. The road to New York, Ambassador Rattray, I said I asked you very briefly about. I put it briefly about the outcome document, because you place a lot of importance on the outcome document and how to get the input into the formulation of the outcome document that be essential or optimally useful. You want to comment about that? And then I'm going to ask any questions from our audience. I am sure that those of you who are using your cell phones now are, what's it called it now, tweeting away. That's the only reason you're using your cell phones. Yes,
okay. Before I answer that question, let me just point out one logistical wrinkle.
Yes.
We as member states, we have been trying to cut back on the number of high-level meetings that are held during the UN's opening week, which, as I said, it's called the general debate. Yes. That's when world leaders give their statements to the world. And if you have a high-level meeting, people are at the high-level meeting and a leader is talking in the General Assembly Hall, and it's just a smattering of people because the other leaders are either at a side event, having bilateral meetings with their counterparts, or attending some high-level meeting. Remember, the general debate starts on the Tuesday. The high-level meeting is on the Thursday. And it's going to happen at the same time as a general debate.
Yes.
Now, if you are a Caribbean prime minister, and you probably have 5 or 6 Caribbean prime ministers scheduled to speak on the same day as the NCDs, and they want to be there to show solidarity. So Jamaica might say, wait a minute, Prime Minister Barbados is speaking now? I have to be in the room. That means he's not at the NCD meeting, because the NCD meeting is parallel to the general debate.
So what would you suggest?
I don't know. I mean, you might have 7 Caribbean leaders speaking from morning to the afternoon, and all of them feel that they need to be there to hear their colleague, which means they're not going to be at the high-level meeting.
So what do you suggest? What's your suggestion?
I'm just...
We have at the moment a problem without a solution. Just a minute, sorry, go ahead, yes.
You know, when we were thinking about whether we should have this at another time,
yeah.
The con is that if you have it in July, you're probably not going to have high-level representation. The danger of having it in September is what I just mentioned. So
right.
You're never going to get something that is perfect. I'm just pointing this out. Yes, you know, but just note that, because they're happening in parallel.
Yeah.
On the outcome document, what the co-facilitators will first do is to present a zero draft,
right.
And we will negotiate a zero draft. Now, put your mind, you know, imagine that you're a delegate. This thing lands on your lap. So this is the draft document. what are you going to do? Well, the first thing you're going to do is to look at that document and see whether what you want to be in there is in there. The second thing you're going to do is look at the document and say, is something in there that I don't think should be in there? That means I'm going to negotiate it for it to come out. The third thing you're going to do is look and see, okay, is there something that should be in there that is in there, but I would rather it be expressed in a different way? So that's the lens through which a delegate looks at an outcome document. Now, it's very important that when those co-facilitators table the zero draft, that we have as much of what we want in there as possible. Yeah, so you want to get to the co-facilitators, and you want to put your views to them before they even craft that document.
Now, Maisha has worked diligently to consolidate a lot of what the HCC has suggested should be in that document. She's going to discuss it with us later. But before we go, before the last comment from the panel, not the last comment by any means, but Beatrice, you want to have a comment before, and I'm going to ask you, the audience, what questions you would like to put.
Well, I was thinking there might be precedents we don't want to be there. And so maybe we lope those off and then focus on the other ones. And then, to me, people attend if they have a task. If you're the co-chair, you're going to be there. You know, so it might be finding tasks for some of these people. It might be as simple as they have to influence something, or but giving them specific things to do.
Unfortunately, sorry, Kate, you want to say something?
And I think building upon that, kind of, you know, we've got a clear idea of how the high-level meeting will look like now because of the modalities resolution. We know that there's going to be an opening. We know there's going to be 2 roundtables. We know there's going to be a closing. Lots of opportunities for speaking roles. So, you know, I think we should be thinking about how we can slot in our leaders that we want to be speaking rather than the ones we want to lob out, and try and slot them in as speakers because they're much more likely to attend if they've actually got a role, as you say.
Good. I'm going to ask if you have any questions. The reason I ask federal security, I have a special interest in this because some of us are pointing out that NCDs represents a global health security issue. There was a recent editorial in The Lancet, and we submitted a paper on that NCDs represent a global health security issue, and we must not neglect that angle when we present NCDs as something we consider at the UN. Trevor.
Sure. So this is not a question, but a comment. I think particularly for this audience, if you will, and the delegates attended, particularly the civil society delegates, recognizing that we are virtually all of us come in from small communities, but yet nation states with heads of governments, that we should each of us recognize and realize that we have a role to play in interacting with our individual heads of governments and in an effort to get them to attend the high-level meeting. And I think that is an area that I'd like us to be sure that we are aware of, that it is not, or yes, it's part of the role of the wider and the international NCD Alliance, etc. And so, but each and every civil society organization here also has that kind of role.
I couldn't emphasize that more. It's one of the benefits of small states, that the circles in which you move and you move and you move are more likely to influence a head of state than the circles in which someone from Chile moves. Any other? Yes, please, Dr. George. Yeah. A question?
No, just a comment. I think that over the years, HCC has now become an institution in the Caribbean, and governments recognize the work that they have done. So I think they are well placed to directly engage each leader from the region. And within that package, you will put the issues of the day and what are the interests to the region with respect to the expected results we want at the final negotiation. So my suggestion is that HCC write the heads of all the English-speaking or who they represent. Copy those letters to the ministries, the ministers of health, And in that document, we'll have a comprehensive picture as to what we're trying to achieve.
Dr. George, as John Gold used to say, Professor, I agree with you, but it is not only the responsibility of HCC. It has to devolve on individuals as well. You go to church, you have your church members. You can mention to your church members or the circles in which you move that NCDs is an important issue. And they're having a major meeting in New York, and you would like to see, and you would amaze sometimes how those little seeds grow. So I agree with you in terms of AC, but as John Golding was talking to the professor of pediatrics once, and he says, this particular condition is common in boys or girls. Colville says it is in boys. John Golding says, you're quite right, but it's common in girls. Yes.
I agree with the points that all of us have a role, but looking at the fact that we do have two simultaneous events, who is our NCD rock star? So, you know, when you have your dancehall show, you look for your rock star, and that rock star will pull that crowd with them to the event, even if you're having a simultaneous event, if we look at it that way. Who is a rock star that everybody wants to be seen with, wants to associate with for your event? It may sound very shallow, but it's part of how you would, do things.
The only thing, I don't hope you didn't imply that among the heads, there's a rock star among the heads. I hope you didn't say that. That's what you...
So George, over here.
Ambassadors, you didn't hear that. You didn't hear that. But otherwise I thought you were talking about Rihanna. Please, please, please. And then Dr. Hospitalis, and then Brett. Yes, please.
Yes, first of all, let me just say thank you to the two presenters before and to the very interactive session, Sir George, with the team. You've motivated me and I feel
good,
energized. And it actually made me think that recently, with regards to gun violence in the US, we had youth coming up, marching and saying, I'm going to take control of what happens to me. And I looked around and I felt maybe that's a group that's missing in this room. Because when we looked at the statistics, the risk of obesity and everything is becoming more for our youth. So what are we doing to engage them to see this as a cause to fight for?
Actually, you asked the wrong person, because I would have included you among the youth. James.
So George.
James. And then Dain. But James, you have the mic already. Please go ahead.
So George, let me address the real rock star in the room. Who is Sir George?
No.
And maybe you can give a demonstration. Anyway, the point is this. There are two questions I'm asking, and I hope it can trigger some discussion on the way forward. One, what was the secret of the 2007 declaration with the heads in the room? And how far is it removed now from the situation at the UN? They came together and they decided they wanted to have commissions across the Caribbean. All right? So what is the difference now and then? That's one. Two, what was the secret of the climate change scenario just about hardly 2 years ago that gained so much globally, with Caribbean countries actually starring gloriously on the world stage? What can we borrow from that scenario to now that can help us forge ahead? Thank you.
Thanks. The ambitious Paris Agreement and the momentum after, that was well over 2 decades in the making. And in the lead up to Paris, the reality is that the science, the economics, and the politics of climate change aligned. It was perfect alignment. And that is what we're seeking to achieve here. On the science side, the threat of climate was apparent. You had authoritative scientific findings and reports on the risks and opportunities and the imperative of early action. On the economic side, you had clear opportunities for climate action. You also had coalitions within this private sector and civil society pushing for ambitious action on climate change. There were clear winners. The cost of renewable energy had decreased significantly, battery storage, and that trajectory continues. On the politics side, you had a champion in Ban Ki-moon. You know, I had the honor of sitting next to him and working with him to help deliver the Paris Agreement. In every engagement that he had with leaders, from President Obama to the leader of the smallest country, he spoke about climate change. At a time when you had Syria, you had crises all over the world, you had the Ebola crisis. He was the global champion on climate change. He brokered political consensus on all of the major difficult political issues. He encouraged President Obama and President Xi Jinping to meet, to engage, and to find compromise on some of the difficult political issues. He, as Secretary General, when he attended G7 meetings, G20 meetings, climate was raised to the top. You know, he was the one. So you need that political leadership. You need a global champion, someone who has the standing of a UN Secretary General, or it could be someone like a Mike Bloomberg. It could be someone, you know, an influential leader, a G7, G20, or a coalition. But it was the politics, alignment of the politics, the science, and the economics. And one of the other factors, and I think that this is important, that in terms of the private sector outreach, he saw himself as an honest broker. So he not only engaged with the Teslas or with the good, quote unquote, good guys. He bought the oil and gas industry that had for decades undermined any attempt for any global action on climate change. He said, this is your last opportunity to be part of this transition. So he engaged that community as well. And I know within the NCD discussion, there is, you know, a community as well that might not necessarily always do the right thing. But I think someone needs to engage them, right? Someone needs to engage them to get them to be part of this movement, to be part of a just transition. You know, that was one of the secrets of the success of the Paris Agreement.
Just continuing on this line, Ambassador Hart, first prefacing it by saying I've seen some data recently from, I think it was a G20 source, that of people's concerns in the world, health does not rank in the top 5. Your pocket, your security, and climate change actually rank above health. First comment. Second comment is that climate change and NCDs are two sides of the same coin. It's a coin of overconsumption of fossil fuel, of food, of alcohol, tobacco, living unsustainably without a thought for the future. That is, and I wonder, my question is then, if you accept that for a little bit, how do we, the monolithic agriculture systems, the land that's being used for growing sugar, the land that's being used for claim for growing tobacco, it's contributing to the greenhouse gases. The biggest beneficiaries of joint action would be in transportation, would be in finance and economy, and would be in the food supply. So how do we dig into that and get the tree huggers to work with the people lovers to save this place?
Thank you much, James. I think the what Ambassador Hart is not denying that. He said, but the reality of the situation, how you get the champion to go in there and say, yes, please.
Based on the point that you made earlier, Sir George, Alleyne, the situation in Chile and the situation in small islands would be quite different in terms of addressing the heads of state. And based on what I read on the website about the high-level meeting and getting the heads of state to be present, and this forum here today, I am empowered to go back to Dominica, to go back to Dominica and schedule a meeting with the Minister of Health and the Prime Minister.
Well done, well done. You see, that is action. That is action. Yes, please. I'll come back to you. Yes, please.
Thank you, Sir George. Yeah, my comment is brief, and it's anticipating a little bit what I was asked to reflect upon tomorrow about the financing. And I agree very much with what James said before. I don't think the high-level meeting will make any meaning if the financing and the economics perspectives are not at the forefront of that meeting. If we have another meeting without that at the forefront, not much will be gained. And if we want to attract heads of state to come and discuss NCDs amidst a busy week in New York with so many other things going on, the economics perspective must be the driver. And that's why we held the conference in Copenhagen 2 weeks ago. Well, one of the main reasons was that. And we discussed that in the preparations. How do we table NCDs in a perspective of sustainable financing and economics and partnerships? That's why we did it. And I think if we want to mobilize Caribbean leaders, European leaders, Asian leaders, that must be at the forefront of that meeting.
You know, we can have this discussion offline. I would, as Ambassador Hart says, there's the science, there's the economics, there's the politics. And I would be reluctant to give pride of place to economics, but we can have that discussion offline. Yes, please.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, my colleague from Guyana, please.
You know, I was part of the ARMS meeting, and they normally have side events. And in those side events, what the ARMS meeting did was utilize them to engage those same leaders with advocates. NCD doesn't have a face. It is about time you put a face to NCD. You keep saying lifestyles. But if you start putting a face to NCD, it will appeal more to the leaders. So if you organize side events with civil society, faces, strong advocate, you can start engaging those people in the meeting.
Okay, we have 15 minutes more because we can finish at 3:51 by my watch. Karen, please.
Thank you. Building on that and building on a comment made here about a rock star, I think you're talking about somebody to pull people in. Ambassador Rattray, the one period on the week that is possible for the CARICOM heads to influence as a group would be the lunch time of the day of the high-level meeting. Could we consider that the CARICOM heads can host an event at lunchtime? This was done in 2011. Possibly bringing in if a rock star is needed. But the heads themselves collectively hosting an event gets them there and brings a lot of other people to that. If resources are needed, we can mobilize that.
Ambassador Rockstar, Dr. Seeley is guaranteeing the resources necessary. So you can send out the invitations from now. No, I mustn't, but she's serious though. Yes, Selwin.
Thanks.
But I think I was being flippant, but it's a very serious point that Karen made. Yeah. And you were there last day, weren't you? You were there then in 2000. You were not there in 2011, were you? No. But yeah, it was.
So
yes, please, okay. Ambassador.
So to get to James' question and also to emphasize the point, don't know what your name is, that this gentleman that Ben made. I'm an economist by training, so I believe that the economics is more important than the side. But no.
Oh dear.
You need real economy actors in the room. And once you're able to translate this call for urgency and ambition in real economy terms, and we saw this with climate change, strange bedfellows, investment bankers, hedge fund managers, every major bank was represented because they saw, or they were getting signals from governments. They were getting market signals from government on the direction of travel, right? That it will be a low carbon constrained world. And with the SDGs, with the amazing political mobilization, we're seeing an emergence among national governments on the direction of travel. So once you're able to move money and markets, right? You know, translate this message so that real economy actors can understand the market signals coming from governments. There's no bigger incentive. There's no bigger incentive. And to look at the high level session as well, and to face the NCD that, you know, when we were planning major events around climate change on the Secretary General's behalf, we focused on that opening ceremony. Yes, the speeches, as Ambassador Rattray said, there might be some issues, but that opening ceremony, that half an hour, that 1 hour, you bring the kids on, nothing like children to bring tears to your eyes,
I mustn't argue with economists, but the women and children, when Stephen Harper pledged $10 billion to start that, and Ban Ki-moon can say they'd raised $13 billion, it was not the economics that drove it. But anyhow, that's not the issue. Please.
So, Ambassador Rattray, so you seem to have posed the problem again, but I think the problem has the answer that we're seeing. So first of all, we know we're going to a high-level meeting, okay? Are we on that? That all our ministers all our prime ministers are going to a high-level meeting? Right, so that's one thing solved. It's solved. We're going to do whatever we need to do to get it done. At the same time, we have to get, I think, this is my opinion, guys, I'm the neophyte in all of this, but I think we need to get our ministers, because part of the reason why things don't happen the way they should is based on, I want everybody to hear me giving my speech. I'm the prime minister of whatever little country with 100,000 people. The truth is, this is where we're going to have to also get our leaders to cooperate and collaborate. So if I'm speaking at 10 o'clock, I'm Prime Minister of Caribbean, Prime Minister of Jamaica, probably should not expect me there because, I shouldn't expect Prime Minister of Jamaica there because Prime Minister of Jamaica is actually focusing on the NCD, which is our main agenda item. It's fundamentally, we should be converting our leaders to think that is mostly why we're going there. The truth is, NCD is probably one of our biggest problems. If we don't contain it, let's look at what our GDP, how much of our GDP already goes into NCDs. Look at what the projections are. Okay. Are we going to allow this event? Are we going to allow this great opportunity to miss us? Or are we going to say to our ministers, hey, share the time around, but be there for the NCD meeting?
I don't think, I think Ambassador Rattray is speaking from lived experience of what actually happens, right? You know what actually happens. Any other, yes, sir. Professor.
So 2 quick comments. I think I can also find some money to support that luncheon, so can help you. And the second thing I want to warn about is I'm just reflecting a little bit about the 2011 high-level summit. What we found in the Caribbean is that everybody got so excited leading up to the summit that after the summit, activity fell in the region. It's like you plan for a big wedding and then there's no marriage. So we need to run through the tape, not to the tape. And I would like us to consider what actions do we need to take to make sure that after the summit, we see acceleration and not deceleration.
And any other, yes, Dr. Ennis. And then I'm going to ask our panel and give each one of you.
I think very brief in terms of purpose, getting the Caribbean leaders together is an opportunity to accelerate the commitments of the CARICOM region, childhood obesity and tobacco, having a tobacco-free resort by 2022. So I think we mustn't miss this momentum or the opportunity once we manage to convene them.
Now, thank you all very much. I'm going to give each one of our distinguished panelists a minute to reflect or distill what advice they would give or what suggestions they would make. Ambassador, may I start with you?
Thanks. Well, I would simply say that it's really critical that you support the negotiators who will be negotiating the outcome document to ensure that the priorities of the Caribbean are reflected in the outcome of this meeting, and that we can have an urgent and ambitious outcome. But also equally important is engagement of those who might not always share your perspective, share your urgency or ambition. Because when you know, I've found over the years that when you engage those actors, sometimes you find that you have a lot more in common than you don't. But I wish you well. We will do our best within the context of the OAS, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you so that we can help to prepare or lay the groundwork for ambition in New York.
But Ambassador Hart, I would only change the pronoun. I wish us well.
Thanks. I guess three quick points. Firstly, in terms of process, I think as well as obviously pushing for heads of government and heads of state, we all know that in terms of the negotiations, the missions in New York receive their instructions from their capitals, which are in all of our countries. So we as civil society can be, constantly keeping in touch with our ministries of health and ministries of foreign affairs, which are the key ones within negotiations, to be very much focusing on, sharing priorities, but really also really thinking about what specific language do we want in the outcome document. And we as NCDA at the global level, each time for these high-level meetings, produce what we call our shadow outcome document or proposed outcome document. So when, as Ambassador Rattray said, it comes to the zero draft, we've actually got something in our hands to say to governments, this is what we want to see, with very, very specific suggestions, which is a really useful tool. Point number two, in terms of kind of strategy from a civil society perspective and advocacy is, as we've talked about a lot, the political climate for this high-level meeting is really difficult. And as the ambassador to my right said earlier, there's certain governments out there that are really against making this high-level meeting a success and making it kind of focus on bold, innovative, ambitious ideas. I think the more that we can focus around some really concrete, specific priorities, the better. And I think the other strategy that we should be thinking about is how we can actually isolate the governments that are the blockers rather than being the champions. And so that, as CARICOM, as was mentioned just now, can be a really strong kind of cohesive unit as much as possible in the negotiations. And then the third point, just building upon one of the last questions that came up there, is I think it's so important not to think of this high-level meeting as being some kind of cliff edge, seeing it as part of a longer-term journey, a long journey that many of us have been on for a long time in this room, an important milestone, but thinking about what comes next to manage expectations and to keep that momentum going.
Thanks. Beatrice?
Just a couple of things. One is that I think that getting there is really important. And I think what we do in terms of creating awareness, creating commitment, all of those things are almost just as important as the meeting itself. And we shouldn't shortchange it, thinking only about the end, the meeting, as if it were, an all-encompassing event. I think that the meeting itself, I'm still not clear what the actual dynamic might be. I think it would be somewhat dreadful if everybody just tells us about what they've done. We have such legislation, or what will it be about? What exactly? I mean, granted, we'll have a document, but I'd like to know more about what will these people do and what do we want them to do there, because that's part of attracting them there as well. So I'm still working that out.
Ambassador Rattray.
Cheers. I just wanted to reiterate something, and I really think it can't be overstated, the importance of technical support for the experts in the room. Remember, it's not us at ambassadorial level that we don't negotiate. The ambassadors typically chair negotiations, facilitate negotiations. It's the experts, the thematic experts that actually do it, and they need the technical support. And remember, we're going to go through 2 negotiations. The first one is a negotiation within the group of 77 in China, which is 136 countries the largest negotiating bloc in the UN. And they're the ones, that spokesperson for the G77 and China is actually the one that is going to be doing the negotiating of the outcome document. CARICOM isn't going to be doing it. CARICOM's inputs need to be made when the G77 get together by themselves and agree what the G77's positions are. So that's what we need to influence. That's our first negotiation. The second thing I would say is that when every head goes to New York to deliver their general debate statement, every CARICOM head's statement should have a reference to NCDs in it. And the third thing I would say is that we have a great opportunity in terms of the roundtables. There are 2 multi-stakeholder roundtables, one from 11 to 1 o'clock and one from 3 to 5 o'clock. And we should try and get Caribbean participation as members of the panel, and they will have 2 co-chairs, one from the North and one from the Global South. It would be great if there's Caribbean representation at the ministerial level, either to be a co-chair or if not, to have one of the multi-stakeholder panels actually have Caribbean representation there.
Thanks. Ms. Longsworth?
Following up on what you just said, Ambassador, I think it's important for us to perhaps stay in touch with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs so that our high commissions can keep us abreast of things as they progress in New York. I cannot overemphasize the importance, though, of all of us going back to our countries to do our bit. And I think that those of us, especially in civil society, this is our time now to really start a major campaign on social, electronic media, and pushing that agenda of NCDs and moving our leaders, sending out that call for our leaders to attend, to represent us in our countries and in our region. I also think, though, that we have to be strategic, making sure that the position papers are written, and so we can have intelligent discussions based on information and data, economic data as well, so that when we start meeting with them, those are the points that we need to discuss at every level. And I do think we should organize to meet with our Minister of Health and the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Prime Ministers of our countries.
Thank you very much indeed. Before I ask you to give the panel applause, it is not that I am unaware, and I take Beatrice's point that the meeting should not be a cliff edge. But the charge we were given is discuss strategies to encourage highest level of political attendance at the UNHLM. That was the basic strategy, that the remit of which you were given. So forgive me if I appeared to ignore the fact that we need to have a follow-up. Not, as you say, it's not a cliff edge event. I want to thank you particularly. I want to thank the audience, but I want to thank obviously our panel for their lively and instructive participation. I think it was incredible. I think we had some fantastic ideas. And equally from the panel, I want you to congratulate yourselves. I think we had some interesting and ideas and commitments of things that are going to make a difference to the Caribbean participation in New York. We were arrogant enough to believe that the Caribbean had a major role in getting the issue at the UN and in performing at the UN. We think our small countries had a major role. And I think there's some advantage in a way of this of size, because the ability to interact with persons at the appropriate level is probably unique in countries like ours. So I would welcome your statement and the statement of your statement that what you're going to do. And I think it's something that should come out of this conference, this enthusiasm. Yes, we can. Thank you very much.